They built railways across continents. They laid telegraph cables under oceans. They drew up legal codes, founded universities, and printed maps of a world they believed they were improving. And whenever anyone questioned what the British Empire was doing, the answer was always the same single word: progress. It was progress that justified the conquest, progress that justified the occupation, progress that justified taking the wealth of entire nations and shipping it home. Britain told the world it was carrying civilization to the dark corners of the earth, and the world for a long time believed it. But underneath that word, millions of people died. In famines, that policy made worse. In camps, the empire built. In economies, the empire hollowed out. And every time, the same comforting word was waiting to explain it away. This is the story of the empire that killed millions and called it progress. Part 1. The story they told. Every empire needs a story, and the British story was a flattering one. Britain did not see itself as a conqueror. It saw itself as a teacher, a civilizer, a bringer of order to a chaotic world. The railways were the proof. The schools were the proof. The English language, the courts, the bureaucracy, all of it offered as evidence that wherever Britain went, it left a place better than it found it. And here is the clever part. Much of that infrastructure was real. The railways did exist. The telegraph lines did work. But they were not built as gifts. The railways in India were built to move raw materials to the ports and British troops to the trouble spots. The administration was built to collect taxes and enforce control. The progress was a machine, and the machine was pointed in one direction, outward, toward Britain. So when the costs came due, and they came in human lives, the same infrastructure that was sold as a gift kept running. Trains kept moving. Ports kept loading, even when what they carried was food, leaving a starving country. Part 2. The famines. Nowhere is the gap between the word and the reality wider than in India. When the British arrived, India was one of the wealthiest regions on earth, producing a quarter of the world's economic output. Famine was not unknown there, but the land was fertile, and the people fed themselves. Under British rule, famine became a recurring catastrophe on a scale never seen before. Across the second half of the 19th century, a series of famines swept the subcontinent and killed people in numbers that are almost impossible to comprehend. Tens of millions over the decades. And these were not simply natural disasters. Again and again, British policy made them lethal. When crops failed, administrators kept exporting grain to maintain trade and revenue. Relief was deliberately kept meagre, on the theory that generosity would make the population dependent. Markets, the officials insisted, would sort it out. The markets did not sort it out. People starved beside full granaries and loaded trains. The last great famine came in Bengal in 1943, in the middle of the Second World War. An estimated 3 million people died. Food was still being moved out of the region. When Britain's wartime leadership was confronted with the scale of the dying, the response that has come down through history was not grief. It was cold indifference. And worse, a complaint that the victims kept breeding. 3 million dead. And the word for it, in the official mind, was still order, still administration, still progress. Part 3. The wealth that vanished. The famines were the sharpest edge of something slower and just as deadly. The systematic draining of a nation's wealth. Britain restructured the Indian economy to serve Britain. India was forced to export raw materials cheaply and buy back finished British goods at inflated prices. The legendary Indian textile industry, once the finest in the world, was deliberately dismantled so British mills could take its place. The result was an engineered collapse. India's share of the world economy fell from around a quarter when Britain arrived to roughly 4% by the time Britain left. Economists who have tried to total up the wealth extracted over the centuries reach figures in the tens of trillions of pounds in today's money. That is not the wreckage of backwardness. That is the wreckage of progress. Progress as Britain defined it, which meant prosperity flowing one way and poverty left behind. Part 4. The camps. If progress was the word for India, the same logic produced something even more chilling in South Africa. At the turn of the 20th century, Britain went to war with the Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, over land that happened to sit on top of enormous reserves of gold and diamonds. When the Boer fighters refused to be beaten by conventional means, the British army turned to a scorched earth campaign. They burned farms, they destroyed crops, and they rounded up civilians, Boer women, children, the elderly, and tens of thousands of black Africans, and herded them into camps. History remembers these as some of the earliest concentration camps of the modern era. They were overcrowded, undersupplied, and ravaged by disease. An estimated 28,000 Boer civilians died inside them, most of them children. in separate, even more neglected camps. Over 20,000 black Africans died, a toll that for a long time was barely counted at all. This was not a failure of progress. It was carried out by the most advanced military and administrative power on earth. The competence was real. It was simply aimed at containment, not at care. Part 5. The Parting Gift. And even at the end, when the empire finally retreated, the damage did not stop. Borders were drawn for British convenience by men who barely knew the lands they were dividing. In 1947, British India was split into two countries almost overnight, the boundary line sketched in a matter of weeks by a lawyer who had never set foot there. The result was one of the largest forced migrations in human history. Up to 2 million people died in the violence that followed. 15 million were driven from their homes. Across Africa, borders dreamed up in European conference rooms cut through kingdoms and peoples, fusing enemies and splitting allies, and seeding conflicts that still burn today. The empire called its departure the orderly handing over of power. For millions of people on the ground, it was chaos and blood. Here is what the word progress really did. It was not a description, it was a permission slip. It turned conquest into education, extraction into trade, and mass death into an unfortunate footnote in a story about improvement. The railways were real, the famines were real, the camps were real, the trillions taken were real. The only thing that was invented was the story that tied them together and made them sound noble. Millions of people did not die so the world could become more civilized. They died so a small island could become rich, and so its leaders could sleep at night believing they were doing good. The empire built much of the modern world. But before you call that progress, it is worth asking one final question. Progress for whom?